Celia Marsh could run a banquet for 300 people on 4 hours of sleep and a broken walk-in freezer, and she had done exactly that 6 times in the past 2 years, working the event staff at the Hargrove, Chicago's most quietly expensive private club on the Gold Coast. She was 26 years old, 5'4", and 263 pounds on a good day, and she had learned early that in rooms like this one, marble floors, fresh gardenias, men in suits that cost more than her rent. The trick was to make yourself useful and invisible at the same time. Carry the tray, top off the glass, smile when smiled at, and don't linger. She was good at her job. She was very good at her job. What she was not good at was Priscilla Holt. Priscilla Holt was 38, blonde in that aggressively maintained way, and she had been the girlfriend of Vincent Caruso for nearly 2 years. She wore a different Cartier bracelet every time she came through the Hargrove's front door, and she had a habit of speaking to service staff the way people speak to furniture. Not rudely, exactly, but without any acknowledgement that the furniture had feelings or a spine. She would say things like, "Move the arrangement to the left without making eye contact," or "the champagne is flat when it wasn't." Vincent Caruso was another matter entirely. He was 41, with black hair going silver at the temples and dark eyes that had the particular quality of stillness you only see in people who have learned to be very dangerous very quietly. He ran Caruso Holdings, real estate on paper, other things beneath the surface. Everyone in Chicago knew what Caruso Holdings actually was. Nobody said it out loud. He came to the Hargrove twice a month for private dinners in the East Wing, always the same table near the window, always ordered his espresso double and his water still. And he tipped in cash in amounts that made the waitstaff quietly compete for his section. Celia had worked his table 4 times before tonight. He had thanked her by name. She still didn't know how he'd learned it, and once, when a glass broke near her section and everyone else looked away, he had glanced over and said quietly, "You all right? Just that?" 2 words. She'd thought about them for a week. Tonight was different. Tonight was the Caruso Holdings annual private dinner. 40 guests, invitation only. East Wing converted to a private ballroom with black and ivory linens and a string quartet that Celia had helped arrange chairs for at 5:30 in the morning. She was working the room alongside 3 other staff members. She was the most senior of the 4. She set the standard for how the evening would run. She did not expect to become part of the evening. It started with the champagne tower. Priscilla had requested one, a tower of 60 glasses, which Celia had helped build carefully over the course of 40 minutes, with her colleague Darnell, checking and rechecking the structural center. When the tower was complete and the room had gathered around it and someone had begun to pour, Priscilla turned from the crowd and walked directly into Celia, who was carrying a full tray of empty glasses back toward the service corridor. The tray went sideways. 3 glasses broke on the marble floor. Nothing spilled on Priscilla. Celia said immediately, "I'm so sorry. Excuse me," and crouched to begin gathering the broken pieces from the floor. Priscilla looked down at her. She didn't say anything at first. She let a moment stretch, the kind of moment that's designed to be noticed, to be felt. And then she said, to no one in particular but to everyone within earshot, they really should be more careful about who they hire for these events. Some people just aren't built for this kind of work. Celia kept her hands moving. She kept her face still. She had learned this in the first 6 months at the Hargrove. The face stays still, the body keeps working, and later, in the parking garage, you sit in your car and feel it. Not now, not here. She gathered the last shard of glass and stood. Vincent Caruso was standing 4 feet away, holding his espresso cup, watching, not watching the broken glass, watching Priscilla. His face had gone very quiet in a way that Celia had not seen before, and she had spent enough time studying rooms to recognize the difference between a man who is calm and a man who is deciding something. She excused herself to the service corridor and didn't look back. The dinner proceeded without incident for another 90 minutes. Celia worked her half of the room with the focus of someone who uses competence as armor, which she had for years. She refilled glasses. She managed the timing on the entree courses with the kitchen. She directed Darnell to the far side of the room when a guest knocked over a water glass and needed discreet attention. She did not go near Priscilla's end of the table. Around 9 o'clock, she slipped through the side door toward the small staff alcove near the East Wing corridor to check her phone. Her mother was having a rough week, and Celia had asked her sister to text if anything changed. There was a message, nothing urgent. She exhaled. She heard the door open behind her. She turned, expecting Darnell or her manager Keith. It was Priscilla. Priscilla closed the door behind her, not loudly, deliberately. She was still holding her champagne glass, and she looked at Celia the way you look at something that has confused you by existing in a place you didn't expect to find it. Her eyes moved from Celia's face down and back up, unhurried, assessing with the particular contempt of someone who has never once considered that the assessment itself might cost them something. "I want to be clear," Priscilla said, "that what happened earlier was unprofessional. You should have been watching where you were going." Celia said, "You're right. I apologize." She had learned a long time ago that apologies in moments like this are not concessions. They are strategy. They close the door faster. But Priscilla did not want the door closed. "I'm also going to be speaking to whoever manages this staff," she said, "because frankly, I'm not sure why someone like you is working an event at this level. You're clearly not suited for it." Celia looked at her. "Someone like me. You know what I mean?" "I don't, actually," Celia said, and her voice came out steady, which surprised her a little. Priscilla's eyes moved down and back up again. One more time. Slower. "Vincent has a standard for everything around him, his home, his business, his events. I've worked very hard to maintain that standard. And then you have people in the room who just—" she gestured vaguely at Celia's general existence— "don't fit. It disrupts things." Celia felt something shift in her chest. Not hurt, exactly. Something older than hurt. Something she had been carrying since middle school and had gotten very used to the weight of. She thought about the champagne tower she had spent 40 minutes building. She thought about the 6 times she had saved an event from disaster, and not one of those moments had been entered into any record anywhere. She thought about her mother, who worked double shifts at a laundry facility in Pilsen until her feet swelled, and who had raised Celia with the instruction, "You don't get to fall apart in front of people who are hoping you will." "I've worked this room for 2 years," Celia said. "The events run the way they run because of people like me. I'm sorry you feel disrupted." Priscilla opened her mouth. The door opened. Vincent Caruso stood in the doorway. He looked at Priscilla, he looked at Celia, he looked at the space between them, which had approximately the temperature and pressure of a room right before a storm. "Priscilla," he said. His voice was very level. "They're doing the dessert course. I was just speaking to the—" "I know what you were doing." 3 words. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet in the alcove changed shape when he said it, and Celia watched something move across Priscilla's face. Not embarrassment exactly. Recognition. The recognition of someone who has, perhaps for the first time, understood that they have miscalculated. Priscilla left. Vincent stayed. He looked at Celia for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "I want you to know that what she said was not acceptable. And I heard it, and I'm sorry you were standing here for it." Celia said, "It's not the first time something like that has happened?" "No," he said. "I imagine not." He looked at her with those steady, dark eyes. "That doesn't make it acceptable." She didn't know what to do with that. She had spent so long absorbing without acknowledgement. That acknowledgement itself felt strange, like a hand extended in a direction she hadn't been looking. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once and left. She stood in the alcove for a moment, and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and breathed. She did not think about it after that. She told herself she did not think about it. She worked the rest of the dinner with the same precision she always brought. She oversaw the dessert service and the coffee. She coordinated the exit for the string quartet and made sure the coat check ran smoothly. She supervised breakdown until midnight. She drove home to her apartment in Logan Square, showered, and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark. She thought about the way he had said, "I know what you were doing." Not as a reprimand, as a fact, as a man who had seen exactly what was happening from the moment it started and had made a decision about it. She thought about Priscilla's face when he walked in. She fell asleep with her work shoes still on and was up at 6 for a catering setup across town. She didn't see Vincent Caruso for 3 weeks. He came back to the Hargrove on a Thursday evening, usual table, usual time, and when Celia brought his water, he looked up and said, "How are you, Celia?" Same as always, but maybe a half-second longer than the question usually warranted. "Fine," she said, busy. "You?" "Always," he said. She came back with his espressos. He said, without looking up from the folder he was reviewing, "I want to apologize again for that evening." "Properly. You already apologized." That was in the moment. He closed the folder. "This is considered." She was quiet for a second. "You don't need to. It wasn't your fault." "It happened at my event," he said, "in my name." She thought, "Who is this man?" She thought, "Don't think that." "Apology accepted," she said, and went back to work. It went on like that for another month. Brief exchanges. A question about whether she'd seen a particular restaurant that had opened near the river. A comment on the music selection the club had chosen for a Saturday evening, which was, they agreed, aggressively mediocre. He remembered things she said. That was the thing she noticed first. He actually listened to what she said and then later demonstrated that he had retained it, which in Celia's experience was rarer than it should be. She didn't let herself do anything with it. She was not naive. She had seen the Cartier bracelets, and she knew what Vincent Caruso was, and she was a 26-year-old woman who made $14 an hour, plus tips, and worked a second shift at a diner on Saturdays. There was no version of any story she knew where those two things overlapped in a way that ended well for her. She kept the conversations brief and professional and went home and told herself she was sensible. In the 4th week, Keith called her into the small manager's office near the front of the club and told her, with the expression of a man delivering news he couldn't quite explain, that someone had requested her specifically for a private dinner at a residence on Lakeshore Drive the following Saturday. High-end. Full catering, staff of 3, and the client had asked for Celia to oversee the evening. She asked who the client was. Keith said the name. She stood in the office for a moment. "Is that a problem?" Keith asked. "No," she said. "No, I can do it." The house on Lakeshore Drive was the kind of place that doesn't announce itself. No gates with elaborate scrollwork, no fountains in the drive, just a limestone facade, a dark wood door, and the particular silence of a building that has been designed so well it doesn't need to try. She arrived at 3 with the team and a van of equipment, and a man named Hewitt, who was clearly security, and clearly not interested in pretending otherwise, walked her through the kitchen and the dining room, and the terrace. She set up the dinner would be served. She set up the terrace herself. She wanted it right. The dinner was for 8 guests. They arrived in pairs at 7:30. Vincent came down from upstairs at 10 to 8 in dark charcoal pants and a shirt with the collar open, and he paused at the terrace door when he saw the table and said quietly, "This looks beautiful." "Thank you," Celia said from behind the service station at the terrace's far edge. He looked over at her. He looked at the table. He looked back at her. "Come and sit," he said. She looked at him. "I'm working." "Hewitt can manage the service for 20 minutes. I want you to sit down, Mr. Caruso." "Vincent," he said, "please." She looked at the table. She looked at him. She thought about all the reasons this was a categorically bad idea, and the reasons had the particular weakness of arguments that are logically correct but emotionally unconvincing. He sat across from her, and his guests weren't out yet, and for 20 minutes in the dark terrace above Lake Michigan with the city stretched out to the south, they talked. Really talked. He asked about her mother, and she told him. The double shifts, the feet, the way her mother had gotten Celia her first job by walking her into a restaurant at age 14 and telling the manager that her daughter was the hardest worker in Pilsen and he'd be a fool not to hire her. He laughed at that, genuinely. Not the polite laugh of someone performing interest. He told her about his grandmother in Naples, who had run a household of 9 on a widow's income and never once failed to have a meal on the table, and who had looked at young Vincent when he was 10 years old and said, "The people who serve you are not beneath you. They see everything. Treat them accordingly." "She sounds incredible," Celia said. "She was the most frightening person I've ever known," he said. "I've known some genuinely frightening people." She laughed. His guests arrived on the terrace. He stood. She stood. He introduced her. Not as the event coordinator, not as the staff, by her name. "This is Celia Marsh. She has made sure this evening is going to be exceptional." She felt the warmth move up her face. She nodded and went back to the service station and ran the dinner with the kind of precision that the guests probably thought was just how Vincent's events always went, which it was, because of her. She drove home afterward in the company van and sat in the parking lot outside her building and put her forehead on the steering wheel and said, out loud to no one. She did it anyway. It was not a decision that happened all at once. It happened the way most real things happen, in small accumulations over weeks. He called the Hargrove to request her for 2 more events. He left a note once with Keith, actual paper, actual handwriting, asking if she would be interested in managing the quarterly dinner series he hosted for his closest associates, at a rate he named that was 3 times what she made in a week. She said yes, because she was not going to pretend that wasn't transformative money, and because she could run his events in her sleep, and because she was 26 and not dead. The first time he called her personally. He had gotten her number from Keith, with her permission. Keith had asked her first, which she respected. He said, "I realize this is not standard," and she said, "No, it isn't," and there was a silence that had a texture to it. "I'd like to have dinner," he said, "not an event. Just dinner. You and me," she said. "I need to think about that," he said. Of course. She thought about it for 4 days. She thought about all the ways it could go wrong and all the ways she would be the one to absorb the consequences when it did. She thought about Priscilla and the Cartier bracelets and rooms full of people who looked through her. She thought about what it felt like to have someone look at her the way he looked at her. Not through, not past, but with the full weight of his attention. And she thought about her mother who would say you don't get to fall apart in front of people who are hoping you will. And then she thought, but what about the people who aren't hoping that? What about those people? She called him back on a Thursday. "Yes," she said. He said, "Saturday at 8. I'll send the address." She said, "I know how to get places on my own." "I know you do," he said. "I've been watching you run events for 5 months." She was not unaware that the world she was moving into had edges. She knew what Vincent Caruso's business actually was. She knew the kind of men who came to his dinners and the kind of weight that his last name carried in certain rooms. She was not a woman who had gotten to 26 by being careless about the world she lived in. She went in with her eyes open, which she thought later was probably the right word for what happened between them. She saw him clearly, and she let herself be seen clearly, and it was terrifying in a way that had nothing to do with danger, and everything to do with the specific vulnerability of being known. The dinner was at a restaurant, where the owner came out to greet him by name, and then looked at Celia, and treated her with the same courtesy which she noticed. He pulled her chair out, which she was going to say something about, and then she watched his hands and decided she wouldn't. He ordered the wine and asked her first what she wanted, and when she said, "I don't actually know wine that well," he said then, "I'll pick something I think you'll like, and you can tell me if I'm wrong," which she appreciated, because it wasn't condescending. It was just honest. She told him about growing up in Pilsen. He told her about growing up in the kind of family where the obligations are not written down anywhere but are understood by everyone. She said, "That sounds exhausting." He said, "It is. It's mine. I don't expect anyone outside it to understand that." She said, "I think I understand it a little. My mother kept us fed by calling in every favor she'd built over 30 years. Community is obligation. It just depends on whether the obligation is given freely or not." He looked at her across the table for a moment. "Yes," he said, "exactly that." She drove herself home and sat in her car, and her heart was loud. Priscilla found out 2 months later. Celia didn't know how. She hadn't been hiding exactly, but she hadn't been public about it either, because she was not a woman who performed her life for an audience, and because she was still figuring out what it was. But Priscilla found out, the way people who need to know things find out, and she did not take it quietly. The first move was social. A post on the kind of account that the particular social world Vincent existed in actually monitored, oblique enough for deniability, specific enough to land. Something about standards and who people bring into their circles and what it says about them. It was elegant in the way that cruelty is sometimes elegant when it's been practiced long enough. Celia saw it because someone texted her a screenshot, the way people do when they want to claim they're showing you something out of concern. She stared at the screenshot for a while, then she put her phone down and went to her shift. The second move was at the Hargrove. Priscilla came in on a Tuesday, not a night she usually came, and asked for Keith. She told Keith, Celia learned later, that there had been an incident of inappropriate behavior by a staff member, and that she had concerns about the professionalism of the event team. She did not name Celia directly. She didn't have to. Keith, to his credit, came to Celia immediately after and said, "I just want you to know what happened, and I don't believe a word of it. And I'm going to handle it." He did handle it. But Celia had worked too long in rooms like this to pretend it didn't land. She called Vincent that night. He picked up on the second ring. She told him what had happened. Not with drama. She was not a dramatic person, in the same way that people who have been through real difficulty tend not to perform it. She told him factually, and she told him she wasn't asking him to do anything about it, and she just thought he should know. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Celia, are you home?" "Yes. Stay there," she said. "Vincent, I told you I wasn't asking you to." "I know," he said. "I'm not doing this because you asked. I'm doing it because it was right." "I'll handle it," she said. "I don't need to be handled." "No," he agreed. "You don't. But some other things do." She did not find out exactly what he said to Priscilla. She only knew the results. The social post disappeared within 48 hours. Priscilla did not return to the Hargrove. She did not, as far as Celia could tell, take any further steps. Not publicly, not through back channels, not through the particular network of whispers and implications she had deployed before. What Celia did find out was that Priscilla had a property, a lifestyle consulting firm she had spent 3 years building, with 2 junior partners and a roster of 8 high-value clients, all of whom were connected in various degrees to Vincent Caruso's world. 4 of those clients, Celia was told by someone who was told by someone else, had received phone calls from Vincent's office. Not threatening, just a change in direction, a re-evaluation of partnerships, the kind of quiet withdrawal of endorsement that in that world was louder than any argument. The firm didn't close overnight, but it began to. Celia thought about that for a while. She had not asked for it. She had not wanted it exactly, but she sat with it and found that she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not satisfaction, not relief. Something closer to the feeling she got when a structure she'd spent a long time building held weight without wobbling. Vindication was the wrong word. It was more like recognition. That what had happened to her in that alcove, and in 100 other alcoves before it, had weight, had consequence, that someone had looked at it and agreed, that was wrong, and here is what wrong costs. The night Vincent brought her to the Caruso Associates' winter dinner, an event she had, in a different life, organized the setup for, was the night she understood that something had shifted in a way that was not going to shift back. He came to her apartment to pick her up. She answered the door in a dress she had bought for the occasion, dark green, fitted with a neckline that she had spent a few days making peace with before deciding she liked it. And he looked at her the way she had looked at the champagne tower in the moments after it went up, with the quiet satisfaction of something assembled exactly right. They arrived at the venue, a private room at a club she had catered twice before, and the room was full of people who knew his name and knew what it meant, and he walked in with his hand and at the small of her back, not tucked away at his side, not hovering at a careful distance. Present, certain, she felt the room notice. She had learned, a long time ago, that being noticed in rooms like this was usually a prelude to being assessed and found wanting, and some part of her was still braced for that. For a look, for a comment that would slide in sideways, for the moment when she would need to put her face still and keep her hands moving. Instead, a man named Bernard Holt, Priscilla's uncle, she knew, though she doubted he knew she knew, walked over and shook Vincent's hand and then turned to her and said, "Vincent's told us a great deal about you. The event team for the lake house dinner was exceptional. That was your work?" "Mostly," she said. "Mostly means yes," Vincent said beside her. Bernard laughed. She shook his hand. The evening moved around her like water finding its level. She met associates and partners and the kind of people who carry their influence so quietly that you'd only know it by watching who else in the room watches them. She talked to a woman named Tara, who ran supply chain operations for something she was politely vague about, and they spent 20 minutes comparing notes on the particular logistics nightmare of last-minute vendor substitutions, and Celia thought, "This is strange and I like it." At some point in the evening, she found herself standing at the edge of the room with a glass of wine, watching the crowd, and Vincent came and stood beside her. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. And then, because it was true, "I actually am." He looked at her for a moment. "You look like someone who's been waiting for a thing to go wrong." "Habit," she said. "I know," he said. She looked at the room. 40 people, every one of them connected to his name and his world. She thought about the alcove at the Hargrove. She thought about Priscilla's eyes moving slowly down and up. She thought about her mother walking her into that restaurant at 14 and saying, "She's the hardest worker in Pilsen." "I'm not built for backgrounds," she told him. "I never have been. I'm the one who runs the room." He looked at her with those dark, still eyes. "I know that too," he said. He took her wine glass and set it on the tray of a passing server. He held out his hand. She looked at it for a moment. She took it. He walked her out to the center of the room, not to the edge of it, not to a quiet corner, not to the space beside him, where you put someone you're uncertain about. The center. Where the light was full and the room could see, and there was nowhere to be except exactly where you stood. She felt the room shift, not uncomfortably. The way a room shifts when something has been decided. Vincent's hand was at her back, steady and certain. The same hand that had dealt with Priscilla's firm and signed off on 100 things she'd never be told about and had learned 30 years ago from a woman in Naples that the people who serve you see everything. He did not hide her. He had never once hidden her. And Celia Marsh, who had spent 26 years learning to be useful and invisible in the same motion, stood in the center of that room in her dark green dress and let herself be seen.